Hi, folks. Steve Urban here, founder and CEO at recruiting and consulting firm Riderflex. If you think today's tip or guest interview can help someone you know, please share this with them. And if you enjoy listening to our show, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button on the episodes. Finally, aside from our podcast, our day job here at Riderflex is to provide recruiting, staffing, and consulting services. You can visit riderflex.com to learn more about us and get the information on the services we provide. And now, a quick word from our sponsor and friends at Marketing 360.
Try the #1 marketing platform for small business. Everything you need from design to marketing to CRM. Learn more at marketing360.com. Marketing 360. Fuel your brand.
I guess I explained it away by I grew up in a small Midwestern farm town, and I am an introvert. Most people don't really believe it, but I really am an introvert. But I grew up in a small Midwestern farm town where, you just, whether you like it or not, I mean, you talk, you tell stories, you become sociable. You have to. It's just so you do that for 20 years of your life, and you end up liking people. You end up needing people, even though you're an introvert. So yeah, I and especially at this point in my career, I really enjoy the opportunity to reflect with people and share, give back. If there's a way to give back, I really, that's how I'm wired. So
That's
I
awesome.
Welcome the opportunity.
Well, I appreciate you being on the Riderflex show. We'll just go ahead and keep rolling here. I'm already recording, so we'll just keep chatting, and then I'll put an intro on it or clip it out or do whatever I need to later. We'll just keep going.
Okay.
If I met you at like a bar or whatever, like in the first 5 minutes, I would think you were in sales.
Well, funny you say that, Steve. I spent time in sales, but the kind of the marketing side of sales more than the point of sale side. I don't think I'm a good salesman. And I don't know why I say that. Maybe I'm an engineer. I think I'm a pretty good engineer. But there's an art form to sales that an introvert by his nature, I don't think is as naturally artful at. And I work with people like Chris Pearson, and oh my gosh, I mean, he's a maestro of the conversation. He's a maestro of the process of sales, and it's real fluid for him. I don't see it in myself. It takes more consciousness and energy for me than I think it's natural for someone like Chris Pearson. So I appreciate the compliment. I'll take it as a compliment. I'm an introvert who can function as an extrovert, but I wouldn't put myself in a sales job.
Okay, gotcha. Tell us a little bit about your personal life early on. You give us some childhood stuff, your parents, where you grew up, and your siblings. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Go ahead.
Sure. And because we're, I don't think you want this thing to be a 5-hour podcast. I'll make the short version of the story. I grew up in a small Midwestern town, and I'm a third-generation aviator. My grandfather flew light planes off of the family farm in the 1940s. My dad and my uncle were both World War II pilots in the Army Air Corps.
Wow.
My brother also flies. He lives in Steamboat Springs. I live, of course, on the Front Range. So flying has been in my blood since I can remember. And I grew up just with this wonderment about airplanes. Because I'm an introvert by my nature, I had my own little laboratory where I built model airplanes as a kid. And that just built in me, that plus flying with my family, built in me just a passion for things with wings. So by the time I was in high school, I kind of sensed that I had a talent for math and science. I wanted to go in a technical direction. I did not want to farm. And really the only option in Central Illinois was farming. So I sort of set my sights on an aerospace or aeronautical and astronautical engineering degree. I was able to get into the University of Illinois. And a year into my undergrad program, I was incredibly fortunate to fall backwards into an internship opportunity with NASA. And it landed me at the Langley Research Center in Southeastern Virginia, which I had never heard of the name Langley Research Center, and come to realize that the importance of that particular institution. It was the first federally funded research institution in this country. It was founded in 1917. The institution was built in 1917 as part of the original National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics. And And it really began the federal government's foray into applied science, engineering science, and investing in technology. And this goes back, to 100 years ago now. So my formative years in college were split focus between academic studies on the University of Illinois campus in Central Illinois, and figuring out I don't want to stay in Central Illinois, I want to go somewhere else. And then being raised by really second, third generation research scientists at Langley Research Center, and understanding the research side of the NASA mission. And it all added up to, by the time I started my career as a full-time engineer, graduated, I was passion driven by technology for satellite structures in particular. And I didn't really know where my career was going to take me, but I just really wanted to dive into this deep dive investment in the applied science of engineering for large space structures. And that's the first 20 years of my career was doing that for NASA, initially as a hands-on research engineer, and then eventually kind of managing programs, overseeing activities. And then at the midpoint of my career, for a lot of reasons, I felt a little bit of an itch to do something different. My wife and I at the time were living in Los Angeles. I was working at the Jet Propulsion Lab, still working for NASA, but had taken an assignment at the Jet Propulsion Lab, and made a decision of maybe a gutsy move. I don't know, but I was just interested in trying something different. We left JPL. We moved to Colorado. I took on with a small business. I was the sixth employee. And I decided to experiment with the world of high tech from the perspective of small business. And that was 20 years ago. And in the last 20 years, I've worked with, and either as a staff employee or as a consultant, I've worked with about more than 25 small high tech businesses, primarily along Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico Front Range, but also a little bit East Coast, West Coast. So it's given me a very broad perspective on technology from the seat of small startup businesses. And then, of course, most recently with Roccor and now Redwire. And so it's been quite a journey. I couldn't have begun to think that this is where my life would take me. I still fly little airplanes.
Do you?
My weekend and evening passion is to fly little planes. I don't live on a farm, but I do live at a private air park in Colorado, where I get to, my hangar's right next to my house, and I get to go pop the hangar door and go flying, kind of like Grandpa did in the farm.
That's
80 years
cool.
ago.
That's pretty cool. What kind of plane you got?
I have a 1955 Piper Pacer, which is so reflective of my personality. It's not sleek. It's not fast.
No.
It's a challenge. It's a challenging airplane to fly. It's a tailwheel airplane that just requires a bit of stick and rudder skill, and I love it. I love it. Every moment I'm in that airplane, I enjoy the experience. It's kind of like riding a snowboard or doing something else. It just takes a little bit of skill alongside of the intellectual side of it. So yeah.
Can you do all the maintenance yourself? Can you fix most of the stuff on it?
I do. I spend probably, fortunately, my community, we have a lot of FAA certified aircraft mechanics that can sort of sign off on work, but I do a lot of it myself. For every hour I fly, I probably put 2 hours of time turning wrenches and fixing things. I mean, it's a 65-year-old airplane. I'm a 60-year-old pilot flying a 65-year-old airplane. So both of us need maintenance.
Hey, you look like you're in pretty good shape. You look good for your age, by the way. You look good.
Thank you. The key is don't stop moving, man. Don't stop moving. Don't stop thinking.
That's right. That's right. So you're married. Did you have kids? Are they raised? What's the story there? Yeah.
I do. Got my wife and I have two sons, 16 and 18-year-old boys, both of them. And I came to kids kind of late in my life.
I was going to say, yeah, that was,
that also keeps you young. My oldest son just graduated high school. He's an auto aficionado. He's on his second Audi turbo sports car. He rebuilds them himself. He's quite a sharp auto guy. And then our younger son, 16-year-old, he plays top tier hockey as a 16-year-old goalie. Last year he played for a club in Indianapolis. This year he's playing in Las Vegas for a club.
Wow. Okay. So you do a little traveling. Do you take your airplane and fly to the events? You and your wife fly? That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Isn't that fun?
Yeah, he's like, yeah, my dad's flying in. And all the rest of the kids are like, huh? What do you mean? Like his own plane?
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, I
That's
mean,
pretty cool.
because he gives me a built-in reason to fly, and so therefore I don't really complain about how much money we're spending on hockey.
That's pretty cool. So when you started working for those smaller companies and things, when you moved to Colorado, is that when you kind of got the entrepreneurial startup bug? Is that when that kind of
Yeah.
started building a little?
Yeah, and I'll even go back and tip my hat to my dad. My dad was a
Okay.
small business owner for 40 years. He ran a construction company in my hometown, and really the option for me if I was going to stay in Central Illinois was to take over his construction company. And I
see.
worked with him for 7 or 8 years. I learned a lot about how houses go together, but I also decided I didn't want to build houses for the rest of my life.
Okay.
But I learned from him a lot of really good basic ideas about small business, and he taught me the importance of a face-to-face agreement, of a handshake, of being honest, and being true to your spirit and your character, and working with people that you like working with. Get yourself to a position where you have the ability to make the choices of surrounding yourself by good people, taking on contracts with people who you want to work for, who you feel committed to. And so honestly, those threads of small business entrepreneurism were in me from a young age, just having seen it my dad and understanding his talent for it. So when I came into the small high-tech business, I'd say that was sort of the foundation. Those are the foundation blocks of my ethic as a small businessman, as an entrepreneur. And I've always been, compared to a lot of entrepreneurs, entrepreneurism, I think, is a set of qualities. And when you sit next to an entrepreneur, I would caution anyone, don't try to paint all entrepreneurs with the same paintbrush, but appreciate that being in a small business environment, being driven to make new things happen in the business sector requires a lot of different skills and passions. And so in my experience in small business entrepreneurism is that I have certain of those qualities that I think I'm good at, I'm gifted at, I've got a vision for. And then I naturally don't have the strengths in other areas and for me, that's just been the formula for finding good business partnerships.
Right.
Chris Pearson and I are, I think, perfectly complementary to one another. Chris is the consummate salesperson. He is the perfect face of a company. And he's a gutsy guy. I'm honestly, even though I fly planes and whatnot, I'm a pretty conservative guy. I fly safely. I think about business. I think about plan B all the time, sometimes plan C and D. Being a technologist, it grounded me, and being a NASA technologist where, failure is not an option, the classic NASA statement. I've always been grounded in the idea, have your best plan in place and work it hard, but have that second plan there. And so I'm intrinsically a more conservative minded entrepreneur, being paired with someone like a Chris Pearson, who's a very gutsy guy, willing to roll the dice a little bit, not crazy, but willing to go a little bit further risk wise than I would be. It's a beautiful pairing, because you want that balance. So,
oh yeah, for sure.
Long-winded answer to coming into the small business sector, but I was attracted to small business because of what the freedom that I saw it bring to my father's professional career, and never had tried it myself. And I thought maybe I can do this. We'll see. And then
how'd you
meet
Chris? Yeah, how'd you meet Chris?
At a bar.
I figured. Yeah.
The maven, the common collecting point that brought a lot of the elements of leadership together at Roccor was Doug Campbell, who was one of the co-founders of Roccor, who was the original CEO of Roccor until about 3 years ago. He brought me into the mix, and he also brought Chris in the mix. So it was really through Doug Campbell that I met Chris. Doug had met Chris through previous business relationships. And then when Doug decided to leave active management of Roccor, he stayed on as our board of director chair for a number of years. But as you may know, of course, he also runs Solid Power, another rather successful small business in the Colorado Front Range.
Yeah, so, right. He was on he was on the Riderflex podcast. Doug was, so he was great. So you knew Doug, and so Doug started working to kind of formulate a team. Were the original founders you, Doug, and Chris for Roccor?
No, technically the original founders were Will Francis and Doug and a guy named Greg Freeberry, who's no longer with the company. He had his own private consulting company. And at the very kind of within the first year or two, interests in the way Roccor wanted to go forward were kind of diverging. And so Greg made the decision, we made the decision, or Doug and Will made the decision to divest Greg from the company, to buy him out, basically.
Okay.
And then I came on board, then Chris about a year later, and then we brought Heather Coulahar in about 3 years ago to do operations, Chris Shaw to do our financial work about 2.5 years ago. Yeah. And the band just kind of started rolling.
Heather was on the podcast as well. She was great as well. So, and let me ask you, so as Roccor started moving along, was there always a plan to sell it or be acquired, or were you guys thinking, hey, look, we're just having fun building this thing and whatever happens? Was there a master plan, or it just kind of developed?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of entrepreneurs get really excited about the startup and post-startup phase, and they don't think much beyond that. But from the very beginning, we were thinking the bigger plan for Roccor. The way it's played out is one of several scenarios that we had entertained, but even back at the very beginning, and the reason we were thinking the bigger plan is that if you just look at the reality of the supply chain, the way it's structured in the aerospace industry, small businesses, by the time they're at somewhere in between the 50 and 100 person level, they really struggle to get past that growth point. There's almost it's access to capital is the fundamental limitation to growth past about 100 person company, especially in the aerospace supply chain. And it's true in other supply chains as well. But so we knew at the very beginning that by the time we hit somewhere between 50 and 100 employees, that we'd be hitting a pinch point with cash, with access to capital.
Okay.
None of us are billionaires. I mean, if we were, it's different for Elon Musk, right? He can just go ahead. He can take it from 0 to 1 million. That's fine. But none of us are billionaires. So we knew that was going to be an important point. And we started looking at scenarios as far back as 3 or 4 years ago when we were about a 25, 30 person company. Because what we were doing in the market space, we'd already validated. We knew that we could sell our product and service offering. We knew that there was a thirst for it. We were back to the sales question. Our sales conversion statistics at that sort of 30 to 40, 50 person company size, we were converting something like 85% of our bids. We were converting to contracts.
Wow.
That's the level of success that we were having at that stage of the company. And so, the Kool-Aid was selling. We weren't worried about whether or not the Kool-Aid was going to sell. As an entrepreneur, the first thing you worry about is whether or not the Kool-Aid's going to sell.
Right.
Once the Kool-Aid starts selling, then you start worrying about how do I make more Kool-Aid? How do I get bigger? And we had already been thinking about that, somewhere in the 50 to 100 person realm, we'd be needing access to capital. We started looking at different scenarios. What we were hoping to avoid was just an out and out sale to a tier 1 aerospace provider, a large Boeing or a Raytheon. And the reason for that is that we felt like the business that we were building is a bit unique in the supply chain. And we wanted to keep the agile, fast moving, our time frame from contract close to hardware delivery is on order of half to a third of a typical industry average time frame. So we're delivering flight hardware on a 12 to 18 month contract to delivery time frame, which is pretty fast for the satellite industry. And we knew that if we sold to a big prime, their likelihood is over time that we'd lose the ability to do that. Gotcha. It's just sort of inevitable as you become part of that big prime mentality. So we were looking at other avenues for bringing cash into the company. And what we found with Redwire was it was almost a hand to glove fit. It was an amazing opportunity that I hadn't even conceived of 3 or 4 months earlier, but it just fit the need that we had for access to capital perfectly. And I think what we offered as a business was a perfect fit for what Redwire was looking to bring into their portfolio of companies.
Okay. All right. So tell the listeners real quick, now's probably a good time. Why don't you just give the 3-minute elevator pitch for Roccor, and just to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about and what Roccor does, and then go ahead and follow that up with Redwire and what the bigger picture is there and what they do, if you don't mind. Go ahead.
Yeah, you bet. And if I can, let me zoom out from both Redwire and Roccor for a minute and kind of give you Mark's version of the macroeconomic state of affairs in the satellite supply chain.
Great.
Great. I am, I'm so 40 years into a career in aerospace, and I'm just incredibly lucky that at this point in my career, I'm sitting in the middle of what's really transformative. The satellite industry is transforming itself, and it's reinventing itself from the outside in and the inside out. From the outside in, we're seeing billions of dollars of money flood into the industry that we didn't see 10, 15 years ago, coming primarily from the commercial private sector, looking to use satellite constellations to provide services, data services primarily, in a way that satellite constellations have been used in the past. And it's everything from, the digital globe image acquisition. You want to see real-time imagery on your Google Maps, from a satellite. Now I don't want to see 6-month-old imagery. I want to see last week's imagery.
Please, can you fix that? Can you guys fix that next week? Because I would love to see real-time satellite photos. Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Well, that's where we're headed. It's not going to get fixed next week, but that's where the world is headed. We, as a culture, we've got billions of people that are insatiable. We'll all pay a large monthly fee to have access to an ever-increasing quality and lower latency rate on data. That's just where we're going. And so it's created a whole new set of pro formas and business opportunities for the satellite engineering and manufacturing industry. And, we were seeing the beginnings of this as early as 20 years ago with Digital Globe and things like that. We're seeing it come in waves now, things like OneWeb and of course, Blue Origins, you name it. They're just all over the front page of all the trade magazines. So that outside in influence, where the satellite industry is now being looked upon to provide capability and capacity that it never had to provide, thousands and millions of more data bytes per day and a much wider range of data per day than what the industry ever had to provide before. And now what that's doing from the inside out, from the supply chain perspective, is no kidding. We have to be able to engineer things on a tech refresh schedule that's starting to look a little bit like personal electronics. I'll live with this phone for about 2 years, but in 2 years I'm going to expect some new capability.
Right.
So the industry is going in that way. Not every aspect of the industry, but there's a huge driving force in the industry that's setting the table for rapid, high performance driven, component level engineering, satellite system engineering, system operations. All those things are really coming to fruition right now. And that's the macroeconomic backdrop that was already in place 6-7 years ago when we launched Roccor purposefully in this direction to be a supply chain partner for deployment systems, deployable apertures, whether it's an antenna or it's a solar array to gather power. Those are the critical components of a satellite that make it functional. Everything is packaged up tightly. You launch it, then all of a sudden, boom! I pop out an antenna. Boom! Or 2 or 3 antennas pop out. Power gathering, pop out deployable radiators. The deployable appendages are what really ultimately define the capability of the bus to a first degree. So we launched Roccor in that very specific performance engineering market niche. We're going to do a better job in terms of high performance and quick turn time on development of antennas, solar arrays, deployable radiators. And then right alongside that, we started 3, 4, 5 years ago getting into some additional satellite subsystems like power management, because we're putting more power through the bus, thermal management alongside of power management. So that really was our pro forma from the beginning. We knew we had an industry opportunity. We knew that if we could bring some goodness at the component, technology provider, widget and gizmo ideas, we could come up with some good, solid ideas for how to do advanced antennas and solar arrays. We felt like the industry would want that. And that's back to what I was saying. By 3 years ago, we were closing 85% of the deals. And that was just reflective of the thirst in the industry for that kind of Kool-Aid.
Was the money
Red-
pouring in from VC or PE or angels or family offices, or where's most of the money pouring in? Most of the investors, where's that coming from?
So and until we sold to Redwire last fall, Roccor was completely self-funded, so bootstrap funded.
Wow.
We, the team of founders were able to put a little bit of money in to get things going. We were primarily, a lot of the money that came for early growth and also to build our products came from the federal SBIR program. I'm proud to show Roccor's story to the federal government every day and on the weekends, because we demonstrate, I think, what the spirit of SBIR was supposed to be about. You get smart people with good ideas. The government puts seed money behind some of what would normally be, IRAD money. So you can develop the technology, you can build up your workforce, build up your infrastructural capability at the company, et cetera, et cetera. We were also successful in getting some economic development grants from the state of Colorado. The Colorado Office of Economic Development International Trade gave us a $500,000 grant about 6 years ago that was really transformative for us. It helped us build production, scaling, manufacturing cell that we needed for a commercial contract, which helped us then get that commercial contract. So we were able to put those pieces in place, a little bit of founder money, a lot of grant research money from the federal government, some economic development money from the state of Colorado. Bottom line, we were able to get the company grown to this time last year, we were at about 50, 60 employees, debt-free, with about a $15-20 million backlog of business. And we really were in a good position to then take outside capital in for the next wave of growth, which is, again, where we kind of felt like by the time we hit 50, somewhere in 50 to 100 range, we were going to be needing that. And sure enough, we're going through our second facility expansion now in 2 years. Facility expansions are expensive. Hiring staff ahead of the need on programs is expensive. Right. So enter stage left Redwire. And this was a business deal that we closed in October of last year, and that we were working on for about a 4-month period of time, going back to about this time last year, early midsummer last year, we were starting to talk with Redwire and the Redwire investors about an interest in Roccor. And that transition went off, and it's been for us, it's been what we needed to kind of fund that next wave of growth.
And that deal's officially done, closed. The books are done on it.
Books are done on it. Yeah, we closed the deal in October of last year. So Roccor has been a part of Redwire, owned wholly by Redwire since last October. We still sort of wave the Roccor flag a little bit. It's really not the name of our business unit anymore. We are a Redwire, but we use it because of its brand equity. And so it's sort of it's evolving. The use of the name Roccor is sort of evolving right now into becoming synonymous with our engineering practices, our engineering services, and some of our products that we sell back into the supply chain for the satellite industry.
Did Roccor just add an element to what Redwire was doing? Did it complement it? Was it a new service and provider? And then what does Redwire do overall? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So about 2 years ago, going back to about 2 years ago, a group of smarter people than I, who were thinking about the industry in the same way that I am, or I should say richer people than I haven't met them, so maybe we're equally smart, but richer people than I, were looking at the aerospace supply chain problem the same way that Roccor was. In other words, they were realizing that the satellite industry was going to be transformed, that there was going to be new business opportunity, especially in the middle market, if you will, where it's the componentry, the high performance componentry that'll make constellations of satellites work. And that there was a private equity firm that was had already deployed money on the aircraft, the aviation side of the aerospace industry, and they were looking for a play on the satellite side. And so they got together, they brought more investors in. It was a private equity fund that brought more investors in, and that fund launched Redwire.
I see.
And Redwire was launched as basically the business front to a private equity fund in early 2000. I want to say it might have been late 2019, and coincidentally, it was right around the time of COVID. But astonishingly, even though we went through a global pandemic last year, Redwire, the equity fund in Redwire, acquired 7 business units, including Roccor.
Within 24 months?
Within 12 months.
So 2019, a bunch of investors got together. They're going to dominate this space, and they start gobbling up companies, Roccor being one of them.
Correct.
By the way, just so you know, from a commoner's view, right, watching from a distance on LinkedIn and stuff, I open up LinkedIn. I'm like, damn, they bought another company. Holy shit, these guys are growing pretty fast.
Yeah, so that's the result of a lot of high net worth equity investors saying there's a play here in the middle market for satellite industry. And the keys were the same as the keys that we had already kind of unlocked for the Kool-Aid at Roccor. Agile development, bringing new technologies into the marketplace, doing development cycles that are quicker in general. At the same time, though, being able to build out and build capability and build credibility to a standard that the defense classified industry wants. Because while commercial space is pulling and wanting, a new cell phone in 2 years, the defense classified industry is doing the same thing. They're also basically saying, okay, great. Now what can I do with SpaceX capability? What can I do with OneWeb capability? So Redwire was launched with private equity money to go and find specifically companies around the supply chain, the lower tier of the supply chain that allows to kind of aggregate and build a middle market critical assets provider to the industry that can go fast but go at scale. And so Redwire now is the agglomeration of 7 business units, and that's Adcole Space in Boston, Massachusetts, that's been around for almost 50 years. They are the known provider of some of the highest performance navigational instruments, so star trackers, sun trackers that have been flown by NASA, the DoD, all the big missions have flown Adcole instruments for almost 50 years now. So Adcole was one of the first acquisition. Maiden Space in Jacksonville, Florida, which is built its own unique brand for bringing new on-orbit servicing, assembly, and maintenance capability, kind of the next generation of space robotics to allow us to build more infrastructure in space. So Maiden Space was the second acquisition. Deep Space Systems in Littleton, Colorado. They are a bunch of smart people that had spent time in Littleton, Lockheed in Littleton, and then jumped off to do critical assets for human flight and also non-human flight as well. They've got camera systems on the Orion program. They've got a number of critical components flying on high dollar, high value missions. Then Roccor was acquired in October. Shortly after we were acquired, another Littleton company named Oakman Aerospace was acquired. They're mostly a software company. They do mission planning software. They actually provided some mission planning software to NASA for the most recent Mars mission. LoadPath was acquired. They're an Albuquerque-based engineering services company that also has an office in Littleton. And LoadPath, they touch a lot of the different pieces of this puzzle. They do a lot of work on deployment systems like we do. And so they've been a great partner company to have. We've already done a lot of resource sharing between us and LoadPath. And then most recently, we acquired Deployable Space Systems in Goleta, California, north of Santa Barbara. And you've seen them in the news recently, and Redwire as well. They're the developers of the iROSA solar arrays that are just now repowering the International Space Station.
Wow.
They're a late-in-life upgrade to the satellite power system or the space station power system.
Is this a move by Redwire now to collect these companies and then go and do an IPO and go public, or is it? I don't know if you can talk about that. Is that? I don't know what the plan is.
You are on it. You should be a Wall Street. So this is public knowledge. Redwire hit the presses about 2 months ago with an announcement that we are working on a merger agreement with Special Purpose Acquisition Corporation. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Wall Street and how money in the public sector works. So from bootstrap small business Roccor to a private equity funded aggregation company Redwire, and now to public money on the internet, on the New York Stock Exchange. There's a process that's been over the last 10 years or so been popularly used in the high-tech sector. It's getting into aerospace a lot, called Special Purpose Acquisition Corporation IPOs, or SPAC, SPAC IPOs, SPAC IPOs.
Okay.
And the way they work, the machinery of it is that another tranche of investment money is put into a shell company that is itself publicly traded. So they,
Okay.
in this case, our partner company that we're merging with is called Genesis Park. It's already traded on the New York Stock Exchange. It's already set up as a publicly traded entity. It has professional investors behind it and public money coming into it already. We're working on closing the deal. There's already press out there that came out about 2 months ago on this.
Okay.
The
All
deal, I think, as I understand it from the press, is expected to close late summer, early fall. When that closes, and everything I hear is that it's on track to close. When that closes, then Genesis Park as a shell entity essentially evaporates. Redwire is the operating company, and then the finances, the financial management of Genesis Park and Redwire become merged to satisfy all the needs for a publicly traded company. And that's what's going on as part of the merger right now. But Redwire at that point will have a stock ticker on the New York Stock Exchange. We will be, right now, we're about a 600-person company. By the year's end, we'll be getting close to 1,000-person company, and we'll be publicly traded.
So the big question I have then for you personally, so I'm guessing you had units, as they call them, in in an LLC or S corp or whatever you guys were at Roccor. I'm guessing you had stock or units, and then Redwire acquires you guys. I don't know how much you want to share, but for the listeners, because we have lots of entrepreneurs that listen to this show, that's really the base of the.
Yeah.
They're all going to be thinking, okay, so did he get the big payday, or is it just is it just stock, and did you get units? Okay, it's gonna pay off when you go public, and you got a little cash when the deal was first done. Like, I'm guessing you didn't get several million because you're still working there. You're not retired, so I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, so let me answer the question the following way. First of all, in working as a business consultant with entrepreneurs years ago, I always tried to encourage, especially, the most brilliant minded engineer who comes up with this great idea, right? Oh my gosh, this is going to set the world on fire. And you have a great deal of paternal and financial ownership over that. For you to ultimately be successful getting that into the product space and to build a big business around it, and ultimately for you to get the financial reward from that. From the very beginning, you have to open yourself to the mentality that while you own the whole pie, when you come up with the idea, by the time this thing becomes incredibly successful, you have to recognize you're going to own a small part of the pie. You can't own the whole pie. But if the pie is 1,000 times bigger than what you originally, well, that's okay. Own 1,000th of a 1,000 times bigger pie. That's okay, math. The math still works out well. So when we launched Roccor, that's been my gospel that I've preached to entrepreneurs for 20 years now. And it's also been the gospel that I live by. I don't endeavor to own the whole pie. It's senseless. It's self-defeating to try to be too selfish with how much of the pie you own. Rather, you want to partner yourself with really talented folks that are complementary to you who also want a piece of the pie. Be reasonable about how that pie should be sliced as you go through these different levels of growth. And in the end, there's more money for everybody. And this is exactly what we've experienced at Roccor. So when we founded Roccor, when we relaunched Roccor with purpose about 7 years ago, and we were aiming at about a 50-person company with the thought that somewhere between there and 100, we were going to need outside investment. We structured an incentivized stock option program for all employees, not just the management team, but all employees. We intentionally attracted people that wanted a little piece of the pie. That's a part of what they wanted. So everyone that we brought to Roccor, from employee number 6 to employee number 100, was brought in with a certain amount of entrepreneurism. They wanted to have a little skin in the game. And the mathematics and the formula that we worked for our ISO plan were pretty standard, industry standard. When we were acquired by Redwire, we had sort of an independent vetting of our employee ownership model, because Redwire had been buying other companies, right? And they came in and they looked at what we did and they were like, you guys are doing it pretty cool. It's different than we've seen. Most other companies are owned by 1 or 2 or 3 people. We built the company to be owned, for ownership to be shared. So when we sold Redwire, everyone who had been here invested in their stock cashed a check. Not just me, not just Chris Pearson, not just Doug Campbell, but everyone cashed a check, and a fairly significant check. And it was, we sized things so that it was for any individual who had been here 3, 4, 5 years, we wanted them to be able to cash a check that was noticeable and impactful. Pay down your mortgage, buy a new car, put money in your kid's stock fund, sweeten your retirement investment, whatever. Redo the kitchen. It wasn't $100 check. It was a noticeable, substantial amount of money. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud that we were able to take Roccor to a acquisition point where everyone, for the most part, everyone was able to participate and enjoy that. Now with Redwire, so those, the stock interest in Roccor, we completely sold Roccor to Redwire. Well, in that sales, some of that came out in cash, some of that came out in stock. We were given the opportunity to trade Roccor stock for Redwire stock. So I don't own Roccor stock anymore because there is no Roccor stock, but I do own Redwire stock now.
Nice. And when that goes public, there's another check coming your way.
or I just let it sit on the stock exchange. I don't know. But when we go public, and this is really important too, when we go public, now we also have the opportunity as a company, going back to the grassroots employee ownership model, we have the opportunity as a company now to have stock options for the company off the publicly traded stock market be available to the company. And that's very classic for publicly traded companies to have sort of discount agreements in place for employees and vesting periods, of course. So from a personal financial perspective, it's been great for me, but it's also been great for everyone else here too.
Congratulations.
And it's been, it's that way. If you have the ethic of, let's get a really big pie going here. Let's make a big freaking pie.
Right. Congratulations.
Let's not limit ourselves to a 100-person company. Let's go for a 1,000-person company. And that's where Redwire is going. And they don't want to stop at 1,000.
Now, let me ask you. Go ahead.
Redwire wants to be in a position where we are, as an aggregate, as an accumulated business unit, we are one of the most sought after middle market providers of high value components for satellites. And I think we'll get there in the next 2 or 3 years, especially with the influx of money from the public sector that I think is going to come.
Now, let me ask you about a couple of challenges that happen when you're trying to put 7 companies together in 12 months. So the first one is, how's it going so far for guys like you and Chris? You were at the leadership table, making all the decisions. You're not really having to answer to anybody, so to speak, right? You're in the leadership meetings. You're deciding to paint the wall green. That's what you do. You don't have to ask anybody, right? And now all of a sudden you're not quite. You don't carry quite the weight, and you're quote an employee as a VP for Redwire. How's that going? How are you feeling? How are you and Chris adjusting?
Yeah, great question. And that's sort of the existential problem for entrepreneurs, right? I mean, you become an entrepreneur because you're a little bit of a lone wolf. You got a little bit of, I need wide open pastures to run in. That's what entrepreneurs tend to do. And without a doubt, the minute you become part of a large, expanding, multi-site, we're now 7 sites, really 8 sites actually, because one of our business units has 2 sites, 8 sites, 7 business units that are kind of reorganizing themselves. All wired about the same way. Fortunately, I mean, culturally, there's not a lot of drift in the culture. You go from site A to site B. We're all pretty much, coffee drinking. We're all coffee drinking, excited space geeks that are used to a small business environment. We like to take risks and go fast, and that's what makes Redwire, I think, as a bigger company, a bit unique. The fact that we've come together pretty recently is sort of an advantage because. And the fact that we came together under an umbrella company that it wasn't in existence 2 years ago is an advantage. So we're not having to, if you will, work up against a lot of inertia that a small business might otherwise have to deal with if you were to be acquired by Raytheon, for example, or any other, pre-existing large company where, from now on, it's going to be the Raytheon way, whatever that is, right? There's certainly in the couple of years, Redwire has, from an operations standpoint, has started to coalesce operational functions at the headquarters level, and we're trying to get more uniformity across the business units. And so there are some constraints being put in place at the business units. Well, I know you did it this way last year, but we'd like to try to do it this way because that'll lean towards more, uniformity. But right now, those are all the subject of conversation around the board table, right? So all the business units that are here already and all the presidents of those business units, including Chris Pearson, have a voice at the table. And in the end, what we're endeavoring to do is to I use a little bit of analogy of the United States. Redwire is kind of like the United States. There's a federal, centralized element of governance and continuity that we want to establish, and mission and vision. But the individual business units are still being encouraged, frankly, to maintain not an autonomy, but maintain whatever is important, so that they can continue to be a product or a service provider that's value added to the industry. Because the reason Redwire came together is this unique market opportunity, supply chain opportunity. If we over processize all the business units, then all of a sudden we're not making the right Kool-Aid anymore. There's a sensibility at the Redwire board of directors level that you've got to allow the business units, the local managers, to manage in the way that they understand the market wants. So there's it's creating, I think, sort of a layered culture, if you will, a little bit of a micro or tribal culture that still resides in the business units. It's reflective of the legacy business and the way that we like to, and we found that we can relate to our customers to provide them what they want, as well as how we do employee development. And then the broader culture of Redwire, that's the collective. And they're not at all inconsistent. In fact, there's a great deal of consistency. We're all about moving fast, solving hard problems. Everyone is a bit entrepreneurial. So far, it's working out. It's an amazing experiment in coalescing small entrepreneurial minds. We'll see the next few months we transition into a publicly traded company, and those changes will probably bring issues that we'll have to deal with. But right now,
they will. Yeah, they will.
We got a lot of smart people talking about these things, and we've got a lot of motivation as a collective business to not handcuff ourselves in Byzantine business process that doesn't help. At the end of the day, doesn't help deliver product to our customer.
Right. Yeah. I was watching from afar as I watched you guys put all the companies together, and I was watching Redwire start to gobble them up. And I thought to myself, this is going to be awesome because they deliver great products, great service, and there's a hell of a lot of smart people in all of these companies. And so all that's great. But, you put that many teams together that quickly with cultures, and, they are human beings, and there are some egos involved in different places. And I was watching thinking, okay, their biggest challenge over the next 24 months, quite frankly, is just going to be making sure that everybody's on the dance floor together and moving along. Right.
Yeah. and Steve, so the truth is I don't have to work anymore.
Yeah. Right. Yep. I was wondering, did you agree to like a
but I love it.
Sorry, go ahead.
I haven't been working for 40 years just because I need a paycheck. I mean,
right.
I decided a long time ago I didn't want to, farm or build houses. I wanted to do something that I was passion driven to do. And I love the satellite industry. I love the engineering side of it. I also love the people and organizational problem side of it. And culture, it is central to all those things in my mind. So I feel incredibly lucky right now personally that I don't have to work, but I love to work. And now I've been given this opportunity to be in the middle of something I've never seen anything like this in the aerospace industry.
Right.
I've never seen this approach to aggregating a middle market company and trying to have basically a small business feel and a practical, not just words on a page, but practically speaking, have these business units still function largely as sort of those entrepreneurial, fast-paced, highly motivated small business units. And I think we can do it. I mean, there's a path to doing it that, time will tell over the next several years whether encroaching bureaucracy snuffs that out. But I'm very encouraged that all of the leadership at all the business units, as well as the leadership at Redwire, and most importantly, the board of directors leadership, Genesis Park, and everyone that is basically calling the shots is pointing in the same direction.
Right.
Everyone wants this to happen this way. So I feel like, oh my gosh, whatever little part of that I get to play in over the next 2 years is going to be fun, because if we're successful at what we're trying to do, it's going to be, there's a great deal of pride that we'll all take in having kind of driven a new stake pole in the ground in the middle market of the satellite industry. I think other companies will start to look at how we're doing what we're doing and say, oh man, that's probably the way we should be doing it.
I want to ask you a couple of questions a little bit outside of Redwire, especially since I have such a smart guy and a NASA guy on the podcast. So I want to ask you some commoner, what I call commoner, interesting questions outside of the business, just for a second. And by the way, for the listeners, redwirespace.com, or roccor.com, ROCCOR.com. And then you can also find, Mark loves for people to send him LinkedIn messages so that they can try to sell him stuff. And so you can connect him. You can connect with Mark Lake on LinkedIn as well. Mark, can I ask you a couple of questions just out of curiosity, because I got you on the phone? How many satellites are in space right now, roughly? Any idea?
That's an awesome question. I wish I knew the answer to that. It's tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands. Okay.
I don't think we've hit hundreds of thousands yet. But where we are definitely at a hockey stick moment in terms of proliferation of satellites in space.
Okay.
You're seeing my brother, who lives up in the mountains of Steamboat Springs, about a month ago, texted me one night because he was wondering what the heck was going on. They were sitting on their back deck, and he saw this daisy chain string of satellites being launched. It was part of one of the constellations. I know I've forgotten which constellation launched, but they dispensed 30 or 40 satellites out of one launch vehicle. And of course, when they dispense and they're building out one of these low Earth orbit constellations, they're throwing 30 or 40 satellites on the trajectory of the launch vehicle, and they're kind of in a trailing string, like a chain of pearls or whatever. And then over time, they start to space themselves out along that trajectory to give global coverage. And we're seeing those launches happen monthly, if not weekly now. So we're at a hockey stick moment at the industry level, which is again, is part of the reason why, from an inside out supply chain perspective, there's so much business opportunity here for companies like Redwire. We'll be seeing densities of satellites. Another way I think of it is, if you look up in the daytime sky and you look at how many commercial airplanes are flying overhead at any given point in time, if you're near a population center like Denver, you're seeing a lot of them. Yep. Well, we're closing in on that moment in time where, if you were to take that arc sector of sky up further into low Earth orbit and mid Earth orbit, you'll be seeing that many satellites pretty soon in that arc sector of sky. So the satellite, it's almost like air traffic control problem. Satellite operators, constellation operators, are very much up against the challenge of making sure that the constellations are flying in free space, that we're minimizing collision. We're having to now engineer satellites to deorbit at the end of their useful life. Roccor has provided deorbit products to satellite providers, where they had to show the FCC that within 3 years after end of life, boom, they're going to slow down due to atmospheric drag and come in. So we're having to clean up the satellites that we're not using. We're having to design mission operations so that we can deal with the congestion. And it's a problem that's not going away. Again, people want data. So we will solve that problem of air traffic control, space traffic control.
Okay. I always think about that. I'm like, how the hell do these things not run into each other? By the way, you just brought up a ancillary business opportunity there, right? If you want to like get a boat and like go out and collect satellite parts that fall into the ocean and repurpose them, there you go. Somebody can start a business. I was wondering about how they keep from running into each other. Somebody at one point told me that the reason you don't have any crashes up there is because it's just so vast that there's just not the chances of one of them hitting each other is super slim. But I don't know if that's true.
Well, that is the that is exactly the flight control mentality that we operated satellites on until about 10 years ago.
Okay.
And to use the air traffic industry as a similar example, up until the 1940s, there really wasn't continent-wide air traffic control. But by the 1950s, when we started flying, DC-4s and DC-6s cross country, then all of a sudden we had continent-wide air traffic control to maintain spacing. About 10 years ago, there have been collisions, unplanned collisions between satellites. The Iridium constellation lost one of its satellites because it collided with a Russian upper stage that happened to be intersecting orbit, and they hit it tens of thousands of miles an hour. So, we've had multiple of those.
Does Allstate, does Allstate cover that?
Yeah. Well, interesting. Most satellite providers do insure their assets, and I don't know, but I'm assuming that orbital collision is part of the insurance policy. It's certainly insurance to get it in space. So launch insurance has always been there.
Oh,
but
okay.
I'm going to guess that orbital collision insurance is part of those policies now. Lloyd's of London probably makes money insuring.
Yeah,
costs.
right.
But so where we are now as an industry from a space traffic control perspective is there's several entities that are starting to weigh in. First of all, providing data, tracking data. NORAD, the U.S. government has tracked satellites for many, many years. NASA has a database. They also have a debris management database. NASA also does modeling for trajectory changing. So satellites are going to deorbit and come in. NASA plays a role in helping predict that better and helping engineer satellites to come back. So there's bits and pieces that are starting to assemble themselves. We haven't gotten to a point as an industry yet of having a coalesced space traffic control network that's global. But I see it happening in the next 5 to 10 years. It will need to because of the numbers.
Because of the numbers. Okay, one more last question. I know we're almost out of time. I got to ask you this one because you're a space guy, and this is really going to step out a little bit. Last question. Is there life on other planets, Mark? Are we gonna discover life forms out there before me and you die, or are we gonna miss that? Are we gonna be dead before that happens? Talk to me just a little bit. I'm just curious on your thoughts.
Well, of course there is. There's no question. There should be no question in anyone's mind that there's life elsewhere in the cosmos. The mathematics of the situation, the science of life, the generation of life, make it a foregone conclusion that there's life elsewhere. So we shouldn't continue to wrestle with the question of whether there's life. The question of when do we find it is really the real question of the day. And in my time with NASA, I had a great deal of pleasure to get to know NASA's only Nobel laureate, a man by the name of John Mather. He's at the Goddard Space Flight Center, and he won the Nobel Prize for basically proving the Big Bang Theory. Back in the 1980s, he was able to fly a mission that measured the cosmic background radiation from the Big Bang and prove that, in fact, we did start from some massive event. John's in his 70s now. He's a Nobel laureate. He's also a science laureate for NASA. He's the lead scientist for the James Webb Space Telescope, which will be looking further into space and further back in time than any other observatory we've ever had. James Webb launches, I think, yet this year or early next year. And John's only goal left in his life is to prove that life exists somewhere else.
Right.
And I think he's going to do it. I think John
Mather
at the Goddard Space Flight Center is going to do it. Whether it'll be from a James Webb measurement or whether it'll be from other science measurements that are going on right now, I don't know. But even, the Mars explorers now, we're seeing water. They're talking about seeing the potential of prebiotic life on Mars and some of the chemistry that's coming back from the Mars surface sampling missions. So it's there.
Yeah.
I
want it to happen. Yeah, I want it to happen before I'm gone. I do
too. Well, John Mather is older than me. He's older than you, and he wants it before it hit the end of his life. So let's have faith in John Mather.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Well, Mark, I really appreciate you being on the Riderflex podcast and sharing your story. Thank you very much.
You bet, Steve. It's a pleasure for me. I hope your listeners enjoyed the story.